Hello everyone, thank you for joining this webinar of the European Choral Association. Today we will talk about fair pay in the collective singing sector in connection to international events. And as usually at the very beginning of our webinars, I like to mention that we are recording and streaming this webinar on the Facebook. And I would just like to ask everyone who doesn't want their face to be seen, please to turn off your camera and please be muted during presentations. So this webinar is dedicated to a topic that has not received much attention in the past, also within our association, but it is a very important topic, and it is right that we as an association finally addressed it, and we will try to give you today some starting points on how to deal with these questions related to money issues when you are an organizer or maybe participating artist at the international event. Well, situation on national level can be quite different from country to country. Some are more advanced in this area, others are still struggling and paying attention to other topics. But today we have with us Mr. Sjoerd Feitsma from the Netherlands. He's the director of the Dutch platform ACT, and I'm really looking forward to his presentation to hear and to learn how in the Netherlands are dealing with this kind of issues within the cultural sector. His platform is not really specialized in the collective singing sector, but it works in broader aspects in the cultural sector, in the field of amateur art. So it will be, I think, even more interesting. And in the second part, we will go from this national view to the international sphere, where Martine Spenjers, our vice president of the board of the European Choral Association and the head of the working group on fair remuneration that prepared the guidelines, the recommendations on fair pay for international collective singing events, will present us the outcome and how our association is offering some starting points in this field for all of you that joined us today. And in the last part, we will go from the theory to practice, and we will listen to Mr. Côme Ferrand Cooper, Executive Director of the French Choral Association and the head of the wonderful international festival Choralies, that will share with us his experience in trying to implement these recommendations and in general how to deal with this topic while organizing such big scale international choral events. And warm greetings to all three presenters. And before I give the floor to you, I would just like to invite our Secretary General, Ms. Sonia Greiner, for a few welcoming words, as she has also been very much active in the drafting the recommendations and knows the field very well. Hello, Sonia.
Yes, hello, thank you very much. Welcome to everybody to this webinar. Yes, I must say that we subscribe to the 5 music rights of the International Music Council, and one of them concerns fair remuneration for professionals. And I've always felt that we were not really living up to this in our own events, because we had a tendency to say, you know, we don't have a lot of money, so we're sorry, we cannot pay you what you are normally expected to receive. You are a friend, we're sure you're going to do that for us, or you will get good exposure, so we hope that you will do it for a lower fee. And we did that even at our own events, and we know that many events in the sector have been dealing with a topic like this. And when we organized Leading Voices in the Netherlands in 2022, and we will hear a bit about why this was the trigger, I think we decided that we should try to change this and work on fair pay recommendations for our own events and for other events in the sector that are similar to ours. So I'm very much looking forward to this. This is a webinar in the series of webinars in the Ignite project, where we are offering 2 webinars a year, more or less. And you can see here a short description of the Ignite project, and it has also something to do with equity in the sector, and fair conditions are also connected to the idea of equity. And it's part of our training package in the project Ignite that we are doing those webinars. We are also offering a physical workshop every year in connection with our membership weekend. And I think this is all I need to say about this, and I pass the word back over to Joji.
Thank you, Sonia. Yes, and so as usual, I propose that we start with the topic, that we listen to all three presenters that are today with us, and we will have time for questions at the very end of all three presentations. You're invited to write them in the chat, or at the very end, just to raise your hand and to ask the question on the Zoom. So, Mr. Sjoerd, I think we are ready, and we would really like to hear your experiences, the way you approach and work in this field in the Netherlands. So the floor is yours. I will stop sharing my screen and we can see already your presentation. Hello.
Hey, good afternoon. So you can all see my presentation. That's a good start of a presentation. Thanks for having me. As you said before, I'm going to give you a presentation on the Dutch context, which specifically focuses on things we've encountered here, like a brief history of fair practice and fair pay for the cultural and creative sector in the last 5 to 10 years. And I'm also going to tell you a little bit about the organization I work for and how we deal with these changes in order to improve the working conditions for all people working in the cultural and creative sector. So the broadness of the sector. I'm going to start, if that's okay, with a short video, which is exactly 1 minute and 14 seconds long, mainly because it saves a lot of time explaining what our organization does.
Hello, we're Platform ACT, short for Labour Market, Cultural and Creative Future. We support everyone who works in the cultural and creative sector. We want to improve their position in the labour market by achieving better working conditions, increasing earning capacity, and advancing education and professionalism. We analyse, identify the issues at play. We coordinate and share knowledge, work closely with cultural organisations, trade unions and employers' associations. And we activate, continually raising awareness. With better payment guidelines for the self-employed, new business models for makers, and active encouragement of continuous professional development. In other words, as a network organisation, we work with our partners to improve the labour market for everyone in the cultural and creative sector, now and in the future. To find out more, visit platformact.nl.
Thank you. To give a little bit of context of why we exist to start with, I'm also going to tell you something about the recent history. Because in 2017, a lot of things changed within the Netherlands. There were a couple of reports published back then, and there was also the publication of the so-called labor market agenda, which was written and set up by the sector itself, because the sector itself encountered a number of problems in the decade before that, specifically concerning the fact that a lot of young people were leaving the sector. More young people were leaving the sector because they simply could not live off the income they gained from the cultural and creative sector. Also, there was loss of, let's say, quality of what was seen on stage or in film or on television, etc., etc., etc. And this led to a labor market agenda, which basically is a list of bullet points of things the sector itself wanted to improve. In the same period, the Social Economic Board, which is one of the main advisory boards of the national government, came up with an advice called passie gewaardeerd, so value, passion you have for your job, which also had a number of recommendations to improve the working conditions of people working in the cultural and creative sector. And in the same period, the so-called Fair Practice Code was launched, which was also, I think, discussed when you had Leading Voices in the Netherlands in 2022. And what happened with the Fair Practice Code is that it was set up as a normative framework for fair work practices. It was still a bit abstract and not that concrete, but it was a work frame to work towards a more sustainable cultural and creative sector. What they also found in the advice Passie gewaardeerd, but also the labor market agenda, was that it was necessary to continuously invest in education and training, what we call lifelong learning. Specifically for people who work as freelancers or self-employed, because what they could ask for their rate was so low that they did not have the funds to invest in themselves. So these are a number. I won't read it all out to you because you can read it, and I'll make sure that you get the PowerPoint afterwards. But these were all recommendations that were done in 2017, specifically in the Dutch context, but also if you look at international research on the position of artists, it's basically the same all over the world. What also happened, obviously, here and in the rest of Europe was COVID-19, which showed how fragile the cultural and creative sector in 2020, 2021 still was. So this led to a lot of political attention on a national level, but also on a local level. And this meant that the Ministry for Culture came up with a renewed cultural policy in which they made a healthy labor market and fair pay a priority. This was back in 2020, 2021. They also invest from 2025 onwards over 34 million euros extra for fair pay. That's only the national government, so not local governments. And what we've seen in a number of regions and municipalities is that they follow the example of the national government. It's mostly the bigger cities who want to follow the example and free up extra money to work towards fair pay. And what they did was to make the Fair Practice Code, which was set up in 2017, a bit more concrete and also make it conditional for organizations if they apply for national funding. A spoiler and a warning, this is all theory and text. So we still have to see how this works out in reality. And we just had elections here. So another thing happened as well, which is probably more important for the cultural and creative sector, and that's a change of labor policy within the Netherlands. So proposed legislation and regulations that will change from 2025, 2027 onwards. Now, a brief summary is that back in the 1980s, 1990s, as most of Europe, we saw a big change in the labor market, working from more secure and fixed contracts to less secure 0-hour contracts, flexible working contracts for a year, but also more freelancers and self-employed. Now, what we've seen in the Netherlands in the last 3 years, also based on government advisory publications, is that the national government wants to change this back a little bit towards more fixed contracts. That doesn't really have anything to do with the cultural and creative sector, but more the broad sense of the Dutch labor market. So what research found in the last 3 years, not only in the Netherlands, but also, for instance, in the US, is that the labor market was so flexible and liberalized, basically, is that it sort of affects the innovation power of the country. So there's not enough time, money, or space between employers and employees to invest in each other because they're only connected to each other from a short period, that the level of innovation in the country is sort of decreasing a little bit. And that was also a warning sign for the national government to rethink the labor market and maybe work with more flexible or less flexible contracts. What we've also seen, because there's quite a number of freelancers working in the Netherlands in general comparison to other EU member states, but specifically in the cultural sector, it's over 60%. in the Netherlands, and in some subsectors like the film industry, it's nearly 100%. What the national government found is that this is also a big risk for the social security system we built in the Netherlands. Because once they retire, they fall back on the social security system like as a bottom layer, which we have invested in the country. And because they've been self-employed for so long, and specifically in the cultural sector, haven't had the means or earnings to save up for their pension scheme, it means they require more money from the state, basically. So there's also one of the reasons why the state is now thinking, maybe we should rethink this whole flexible labor market and make sure that people have a sort of net to fall back on in their own future when they're retiring. So again, I won't read this all out to you, but these are all things that change in cultural policy, but also labor market policy in this country. And we as an organization are addressing these changes with a number of incentives, programs and projects. So with a little bit of help from national funds, but also the national government, Ministry for Culture, we've launched an incentive for a disability insurance scheme for freelancers, because if this new legislation comes into effect, a disability insurance will be I can't find the word. A disability insurance scheme. Everybody is compulsory from 2027 onwards. That's the word. So it's not now, but it is then. Also, we've launched an incentive for employers to employ freelancers. So they get a financial incentives to employ a freelancer for at least 1 year. And we've launched incentives for retirement schemes. So this all plays into the change of national legislation. Another thing we've launched already back in 2020, October 2020, is a lifelong learning program. And up till now, 35,000 people have received a grant from us for a lifelong learning scheme. We fund up to 1/3 of the total amount of money it costs now. So these are things we do. What we've also done is to start the so-called Fair Pact program, in which we have negotiations or talks in subsectors without a collective bargaining agreement. So sectors where mostly freelancers work. The aim here is to implement fair pay within this subsector of the cultural and creative sector. And what we do is we invite representatives from each sector, employers, workers, but obviously also unions, to literally sit around a round table and discuss what they run into in their daily lives and in their work, and then also address these problems, and then investigate how we can solve these problems and how we can work towards a better pay. So for instance, if there's a sector where how people are paid is not very transparent, we're working on an instrument to make it more transparent. So that's the Fair Pact program. And the objective obviously here also is to make fair practice more concrete and focus on the fair pay aspect, because that's, we believe, is where it starts. To look at how something like this actually works, we can focus on freelance musicians. What they've done is trying to create a rate guideline for freelance musicians in the classical genre, outside of collective bargaining agreements, because that's already sorted. And what we've done is we've invited 12 representatives from the broad sense of the sector to discuss what they run into in their daily work, and also to conduct research, perform analysis, and think of and produce practical tools for implementation of fair pay. And what happens here, we look at our website and actually use the tool as well. It's in Dutch only, but it's there online. Is they presented a financial report and also the introduction of an online rate tool. I'm not sure if that's the correct English phrase, but this is how I translated it. To calculate their fees for performances without collective bargaining agreements, because if there's a collective bargaining agreement, you can fall back on that. And then the last thing we did is something that might be interesting for you as well, is an online platform, knowledge bank, that offers HR information for employers, but also employees and freelancers. So this knowledge bank gives you an overview of the legislation in place within the Netherlands. And it also consists of a network of over 300 participants throughout the country that work in institutions and have HR tasks. The reason why we started this knowledge bank is because we found that a lot of institutions are so small that they don't have current and actual information about how to deal with freelancers and how the current legislation actually works. So in most organizations, even a big theater, the HR involved person only has 0.2 FTEs available for issues like HR. So what we try to do with this database basically is give them objective and correct information on how to deal with working rights, for instance. So that's one of the last programs I wanted to tell you something about. And if you have any more information, you know how to find it.
Thank you, Sjoerd. Thank you for sharing with us the knowledge from your association and from your platform and the insight that you offer in the Netherlands position and Netherlands situation. I think it's quite different from country to country. I hope that after all the presentations and discussion, we will find out also about situations in countries of our participants, and we will discuss this a bit further. And thank you for this. Yeah, thank you for this a bit broader national view of the cultural sector situation. And now I would just like to pass the word to Martine Spenjers. She's our vice president of the board of the European Choral Association. She was also head of the working group that worked on fair pay recommendations, and she's also very much experienced cultural manager of large-scale events, and she will share with us what European Choral Association prepared for our sector. Hello, Martine, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. Well, thank you very much, Josie, for this introduction. And thank you, Sjoerd, for the really nice presentation. I also learned something new, so thank you very much for that. I would like to tell you a little bit about how we started within the association, within the board, with the subject of fair pay and how we developed our recommendations. Well, first, as Sonja already pointed out, the association is subscribing the 5 music rights. And the last of these 5 music rights is actually about fair pay or fair remuneration. So the association thought it is very valuable to really think about this 5th amendment and what you as an association would like to do with it and how you would really use that in a practical way as well. So we decided to set up some recommendations for the association, and also in a way to set an example for different organizations, for different countries, maybe even to give a first idea of what fair pay could mean in the choral sector. And of course, we have different events, we have different countries, we have different standards of living in Europe. So it's not that easy to make recommendations, but at least we thought we should try to do this. And what I would like to stress specifically on our recommendations is that they are meant for international events. So still you can use some of the recommendations, of course, for your national association or your national situation or national events. but our recommendations are specifically for international events. It's designed for that. And this means for the association that when we have cooperation events with local partners, we really want these recommendations to be part of the agreements that we made. And also if it comes to events that are organized under the label of our association, we also stress that it's important to use these recommendations when you organize an event, or at least to give an idea of what could be a way of fair pay or using fair pay principles in your organization. And in general, as an association, because we underscribe one of the 5 music rights that is about fair remuneration, we also want to promote the idea of fair remuneration and fair pay, not only in our association, but maybe even beyond in Europe. Well, where did we start? We started in 2021 with a working group within the board, but we immediately decided that we should also ask other members of the association to work with us on this topic. And we invited different members of our association from different parts of Europe, so from the north, from the south, from the east, from the west. So we had 5 to 6 people around the table to talk about fair remuneration and fair pay and how they use in their country or maybe in their organization, how they work with fair pay. And all the people were in one or another way connected to our association, and we're all dealing with paying professionals in the choral field. And that could be conductors, it could be festivals, it could be workshops, it could be different types of events. And the working group ended in this year, in 2024, because we think, well, at least we now have a kind of recommendation, and that's why we are presenting this to you today. Well, this working group collected different types of information, and we exchanged this information very openly on the table, but we also decided not to share this information with the whole membership. Because it's many times it's very confident information. And we also found out that there are not that many countries in Europe that really have regulations, official regulations in place if it comes to fair pay. So it's really something that we need to still develop this in Europe, in many countries. So we thought it's not good to put it out on the open to everybody, but we really got a lot of useful information from different parts of Europe on how to cope with fair pay. And then we decided, well, let's set up our first guidelines. And actually, indeed, Leading Voices in 2022 was the main starting point for setting up these recommendations and these principles and starting this whole working group, because this event was held for the first time in the Netherlands. And as Sjoerd already explained, in the Netherlands, there is already a long discussion on fair pay in the cultural sector, and there are already many regulations in place. So as an organizer or manager of the Leading Voices event, I also had to cope with these fair pay recommendations in the Netherlands already, or rules that were in place. And when I want to try to get funding, people also ask me, what are you going to pay everybody? Because we are having fair pay principles in the Netherlands, and how are you dealing with that? And on the same time, it was an international event. So we asked people as session leaders in the event from all different parts of Europe. So we decided we really need a good guideline to pay the people that are doing the work at Leading Voices. So we need a kind of guideline because we can't pay them the same. We can't pay everybody the same as we do in the Netherlands. We can't use the way they pay people in Norway, for example, because the payments are much higher than in the Netherlands compared to the Netherlands. But we also can't use payment, for example, that they do in Czechia, because those payments are much more lower than we have in the Netherlands. So how to deal with this? We set up some first guidelines, and we used the leading voices as a test case to see how people would react to it, if it worked, yes or no. So that was very helpful for us. And then at the General Assembly in 2022, we asked the members of the association for feedback on these first guidelines. This also led to a reviewing of the guidelines. So we added, for example, composers. We changed some things, I will explain later. And in the end, we create the final recommendations. So first of all, we decided to make a definition of fair pay, to put together 6 principles that show what fair pay should be about. So first of all, it should be about equal payments. So that means that if you hire, let's say, 5 lecturers, these 5 lecturers should be paid in the same way. If you ask a lecturer to do also a performance, or do a solo or do some other work, then it's possible that that other work is going to be paid in a different way. So the main principle is equal payment for equal work. The second principle is that the payment should be based on the cost and impact on the artist, or the session leader or lecturer or conductor or whatever person you hire. So that means that when it's an international event, this person should also maybe travel from one country to another. So that means that he is not able to work on the day because he needs to travel. It is also possible that this person needs a visa or needs a vaccine or maybe other costs that needs to be paid. So that is also something we really want to take into account, that if there is a specific impact on the person that you hire, you should calculate that in the fee. It could also be possible that there are additional costs. For example, you ask the person to make a video, or you ask the person to have a specific technical skill that he or she should learn for your event. In that case, then you also should take care of that in your payments. The fourth principle is about net fees. And this is a very difficult thing to do, because in each country you have different tax regulations. But still, we thought that it's important that the fee that you offer is a net fee. So if the person has to pay taxes in his or her country, you have to deal with that as well. The fifth is that you have national fees and international fees. If you are organizing an international event, then it's possible that you hire a choir from a local region or a national orchestra in your country to take part in this event for a concert or for a workshop or whatsoever. In that case, we recommend that you use the national regulations to pay this national group, orchestra or whatsoever to participate in your event. And then 6, especially becoming important after COVID-19, that is the cancellation policy. Because we really want, if you invite somebody for an event, and in the week before you decide, well, we skip the event or we skip this specific session, this person already has calculated some time for you. He or she has done some preparations. He or she has maybe said no to other work because he reserved some time for you. So we think it's very important to put a good cancellation policy in your contracts. And about the contracts also, we recommend to put the contracts in a specific language that both you as an organization and the person you hire can read well. And of course, within the association, English is the common language that we use. So contracts should be in English in that case. So that's more about text and things you can do. Then talking about money, because that's what people most of the time most interested in. This is the proposal that we came up in the end after the feedback we got from the members of the association. And we decided that you should have a minimum payment of 150 to 180 euros for 1/2 day of work. So if a person only comes there for one lecture of 1 hour, then that's half a day work, then this should be the minimum payment. If it comes to travel, that should equal also 1/2 day of work. And travel is of course up to 2 days, because people have to, you don't know exactly where people are coming from. So you can play with it a little bit if it comes to, if people need to travel long or a little bit shorter, but it should at least equal 1/2 day of work. Then we also mentioned preparation, and we did not put an amount there. And we want organizers to be aware of the fact that people need to prepare their work. So, and it can be, the preparation can be very different, because if you need to prepare a session about experiments, that's maybe a completely different preparation than preparing a songbook if you do an open singing. So you really need to be aware of all these different types of preparation, but we put it in here so you will be aware of it, and you as an organizer can decide what could be a good amount. Travel costs should be covered always. The same goes for visa or a vaccine, for example, because we also think about, see that as travel costs. Then stay must also be covered always. And the same should be for meals. And I know that in some countries for meals, there are different regulations. And in that case, of course, you need to check what could be the best way to offer the meals to the people that you hire for the work they do. So these are the final recommendations. And again, I would like to stress that these are for international events. Of course, you can use them for national events, but they are set up for international events. And they are for atelier conductors, for lecturers, for masterclass leaders, for whatever type of work you can think of within the choral sector. Then we also set up some guidelines for composers, and that we did after the feedback that we got. And here you also see the minimum fees that we think you should offer to composers. So there should always be a starting fee of 250, and then an additional fee per minute, which would differ to the amount of voices that you want the piece to be written for. Also this is for international events and not for national events. This was my presentation, so I hope things were clear, and if not, I'm looking forward to your questions later on.
Thank you, Martine. Thank you for this really nice presentation of European Choral Association Fair Pay recommendations. As you several times stressed, it is for international events, but for sure, maybe we can also think about certain situations also when we are organizing national events. And as mentioned, if you have any questions, please write them in the chat or stay with us, as we have the third presenter, Mr. Côme Ferrand Cooper from French Choral Association, a very experienced manager organizing several national and also international events. And Côme, we are looking forward to hearing your side of the story, how it is in practice when we are trying to implement this kind of recommendations. Hello, Côme.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So hello to all the people in the room and all the people following us on Facebook. So yes, I'm Côme Ferrand Cooper. I'm actually managing a French National Association, a network of choirs and singers. But we also have this event that you may have heard about, which is the Choralies. Oh, it's on the other side. Which side is it? I can't do it. Here, you can see it. It's a large-scale festival that happens every 3 years. I will talk about it later. But we are facing this type of questions, and being also on the board of the European Choral Association, I was involved in the working group. So I had to say, okay, where are we on this question with the festival? And we tried, you will see, to reach a point where we are getting closer and closer to this recommendation. But of course, it's not so easy. So maybe I can share a screen for a few minutes. Let me try. Yes, perfecto. Yeah, this one. You should see just a hand there. That's okay. Okay. So we're talking about the Choralies Festival, and it will take place next year in end of July, beginning of August. It's open to all the choirs and conductors and singers, of course. But I'm sure you will join us next year in France. So let's talk about what it means to organize this type of event. So we actually have to organize about 40 ateliers, and we have about a third of foreign conductors and vocal leaders involved in these ateliers. We also have concerts and other activities, but let's focus on this aspect. So we try to apply part of the principles that Martine presented, basically equal payment for all the atelier leaders, payment per day of work, talking about half days of work in this case, and we negotiated all the fees in net amounts. That's a very important aspect, I guess, to avoid misunderstandings at the end of the day. And the fact that some additional pay for additional work is possible. So these are the principles we dealt with as much as possible. So I'll get down to details. So we are trying to reach this goal in a tight budget situation. In France, we for this type of event that actually target amateur singers, it's quite difficult to get high-level subsidies and help, because the help is mostly focused on professional musicians or leisure activities, but we are in a way in between, so it's not so easy to get large funding. So it's quite self-financed festival at the end of the day. So we started on this basis, which is offering 170 euros net per morning of work, because the ateliers actually take place only in the mornings. So if you are leading an atelier at the Choralies for 8 days, you are offered 1,360 euros net. That's what you get at the end of the festival. And we pay all the taxes depending on the situation. And as Sjoerd explained earlier, we have self-employed people, and then we have people employed on normal employment contracts. And then in France, we also have the intermittent du spectacle, which is a specific status, which is more expensive for the employer, but we deal with that. So at the end of the day, the budget is different for each atelier, but the conductors themselves, they get the same amount of money. So we have a lot of different formats between 3 to 5 to 8 mornings of work. The travel, accommodation, and meals are covered or organized. So we try to accommodate the people. And if you've been to Vaison, it's a wonderful town, but it's quite difficult. You don't have hotels. So we, most of the time, accommodate conductors with inhabitants. That's the situation. But this is covered. They don't have to pay for it. That's the logic. And now, if they have specifically intensive preparation work to do, like creating sound files or maybe specific arrangements, we have different ways of dealing with it. So either a small pay to cover for this work. If it's arrangements, we can also publish it because we have a publishing house. So we have different ways to address this and acknowledge the fact that it's extra work on top of preparation. Something we really implemented for this edition is to communicate these rules as common rules, that all the conductors we contact, they know that their colleagues will be paid the same and how it's based. That's also very important to have this transparency in the process, because yes, we cannot pay the way they get when they do a one-shot event on a weekend during the year in a very well subsidized opera house or something, but they know at least that they are not being treated differently from the others. That's one way to do it. So it looks perfect, but actually at the end of the sum of the ateliers, like the 8 days atelier or 5 days atelier, they have a concert or an atelier concert. It's like a house concert, technically speaking, and it's covered in the pay. So we're not paying extra for that. That's part of the deal, and that's where we are now. The preparation, which is basically discussing about the contents, providing scores so we can evaluate them, discussing with them. And it's still quite a lot of interaction in the year, actually the year and a half coming to the event is not extra work in our model up to now. And we have this situation because you told us earlier that the recommendations calls for paying the legal national tariff to musicians. And sometimes we have extra musicians, for example, I don't know, a pop band coming to support an atelier. And at the end of the day, because of the regulations and normal pay that we apply, they get a substantial pay that may be actually higher than the atelier conductor, which is a bit strange as a situation. But that's what happens when you have collective bargaining arrangements that are quite favorable to musicians. So you see, it's not perfect, but that's the situation we have. Oh, then we can have questions. So just to say, see you in France next year. That was my short presentation, and maybe we can have questions, I guess, about it afterwards. Was efficient, wasn't it?
Very much. Thank you, Côme.
Maybe I can give some feedback also what was happening before. So we had some principles that were applied for a long time, and that was basically everybody was paid the same amount, but we did not have this per day system. Somebody staying 8 days actually was paid less per day than somebody staying 5 days. So that's always a question. And the pay was also a bit lower yet. And it's not very luxurious, but at least we are trying to treat everybody the same. So we are progressing, which is the most important thing, I guess.
For sure. Thank you, Côme. Thank you for sharing with us also all these financial matters of the festival. Like Martine mentioned, sometimes it's hard to get this information, how festivals deal with their budgets and money and paying the fees and things like that. But thank you for sharing this with us. And for sure, Choralies is one of the events that is under the label of the European Choral Association. So it is one of the events that follows these new recommendations from our association regarding fair pay. And now we reach the end of all three presentations. Thank you to all three presenters for your wonderful contribution to this topic that is very, very important. And now I open the floor to our participants. So it's time for questions, to open discussion, to share your thoughts with us. Like I mentioned before, you can write your thoughts and questions in the chat, or simply join us with video and unmute yourself and just ask the question to our presenters.
Maybe I will start with a question. Côme, did you get any reactions to, because you have some conductors who have been at Choralies before, and now they are receiving a different type of communication than in the past. Have you had any reactions to this?
Everybody wants to be in the Choralies, so no, yeah, I'm joking. Well, it's also a fact. Actually, I have not had reactions yet, but we had reaction last edition where not everything was so clear from the beginning. And then you have reactions later, and people understand something and they get something else, and then you have to deal. So from the first email, they get a full explanation of the conditions, how they will be accommodated and everything. So I hope we won't have reactions. I still have, like we had before, some conductors who tell me, well, look, this is way below my normal employment level. and either they say, but I will still do it because I love what you're doing, or sorry, I can't. And that's fine. It's okay.
Yeah.
We can do much more, and we don't want to create a two-tier system with big stars, and then it's not possible for us. So
transparency is a big issue as well, just to be clear in communication and transparent. Yeah.
And also because, yes, I'm giving these numbers here because they're actually in the wild. So I know conductors are talking among themselves. It's no big deal, no problem. And if they want to look at the whole budget of the festival, we can actually justify why we are at this point. I wish we could pay everything and everybody better, but okay, do what we can.
Thank you, yes. I don't see any questions in chat, maybe. Is it anything? No. Any other thought? Other thoughts on?
Speakers can also ask questions to each other if they want, like in a panel discussion.
I've added something to the chat after my presentation. I think Côme knows it. It's a link for Creative Unite, and then it links through to a beta version of working conditions in all EU member states. This is a follow-up of the OMC report. And what they've done, I think with a little bit of funding from Goethe Institute Brussels, is to create a beta version of working conditions for cultural workers internationally. So if, for instance, you have something, if you need to go to, for instance, Finland or Spain or Belgium, you can use this tool, Creative Unite /working conditions, to sort of have an idea of what you might expect in that country. What I know of this project, because we're a little bit affiliated to the project, is that they try to, this is the beta version, is that they try to get some funding to make it more into a permanent website from September onwards. So for now, there's a warning sign, beta, so you can't really trust it completely, but hopefully later this year you can. And in my presentation, I told you something about an HR community we run as an organization specifically for the Netherlands, with also information on legislation. Well, this is sort of the European version of that.
Great, thank you. That's important. Yes, if you are traveling and working in different countries, for sure.
Maybe something I can say about our type of organization, we may be a large national organization, yet we are not large employers of foreign artists. It happens technically every 3 years, then in some activities we have over the years, but then every time we have to actually dig into legislation, finding the right information, and it's quite time consuming. So it's a real question. And I know that we are not always exactly legal on everything. Then, okay, we can accept the risk, but we are trying to, which is a bit different from, let's say, a big institution that will, over the whole season, get every month somebody from a strange country with strange regulations. And then we have to actually create new skills every time. That's a big asset, and take risks, which we don't want to take, but we do. That's our situation. Maybe, Sonia, you can feedback a bit on the Europa Cantat experience also on this question in a way, because that's also the same type of format, and you have had a lot of different situations, I guess, over the years.
Yes, I think the main point is that some part of the legislation is very different in the different countries, even within the European Union. That means that, for example, in some festivals, they said we would prefer to have freelancing agreements with everybody, but then some people actually are not registered as freelancers. We have ourselves experienced quite a lot of problems with VAT number issues, because some people believe that every organization they issue an invoice to has to have a VAT number, but actually in many countries as NGO you can not be subject to VAT. And we ourselves are just in a process of not knowing if we have a valid VAT number or not because of these things. And we regularly get messages saying, but you must have a VAT number for us to issue an invoice, and we have to explain to people that this is not true. But also the question, for example, in Germany, as an employer of short-term foreign artists, you have to pay a certain tax on them automatically, whatever is their tax situation at home. In other countries, you don't have it. Sometimes it's considered pedagogical work. Sometimes it's considered a service. So I think that makes it rather difficult even for us to give recommendations on the legal things. And then the other thing is I told Sjoerd that when we were preparing this webinar, I said I spoke to a composers association, and they said, oh, you're not allowed to publish any fair pay recommendations because it's against the competition law. So this is also something we have been hitting. And then I think for us, something very important is what you just said and what Martine also said, that we don't want to make differences between people doing the same kind of work at our events. So we don't want to have hierarchies within the workshop leaders or the musicians who are working at our festivals, but some musicians think that we should have these hierarchies. So we've always had some people who said, but I'm not going to work for this fee. Or if they accept the fee, they start negotiating about 5-star hotels and other issues they want to get instead. And but I still believe that for our sector, it's the correct decision, maybe with very few exceptions. If you really want to have 1 star at your event, and it's very clearly a star that everybody else will also recognize as a star. But I think to draw the lines between different levels of conductors is extremely difficult. And also, of course, we cannot say we pay the Norwegian more than the Bulgarian because the Norwegian needs more money to live. So that's another issue that comes up. I remember in Estonia, there were some reactions saying, you know, the atelier conductors are receiving much more money than the people working in the festival because there the average payment was higher than what a person in Estonia would normally get. But then I told them, you know, but for the Norwegian conductor, it's still not enough because this person has to live off this money at home. And to see which logic you use there is always interesting.
Judith, yes, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, if I may, because Sonia said something about competition law, and it's true that we had a little discussion about this when we were preparing the meeting we're having right now. So I've also done some research on how this now works within the Netherlands, because it's all derived from European competition law, which obviously aims to regulate big multinational companies like Apple and Google, and not necessarily freelancers or people who work as like self-employed. So what they did in the Netherlands, to summarize it, because it's a bit complex, is that you are allowed to do collective bargaining as a self-employed with other self-employed persons, as long as you make agreements to receive at least the social minimum, because I mean, it's not rare that people work below the social minimum in this country still, even with the Fair Practice Code. As long as it's a small number of self-employed people, or together you only have a small market share. So that's a thing. And the other one is if the agreement has benefits for buyers that are greater than the disadvantages for competition. So these are a couple of things the Dutch sort of regulatory office for competition law has written out for specifically the cultural and creative sector also. And it's a bit of a gray area still, but there's more room and there's more flexibility than just to say nothing is possible. Just to add that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Would anyone like to add anything else? No? So maybe we have reached the end of our webinar. Thank you all that contributed your thoughts to this very important topic. At the very end, I would just like to pass the word to my colleague. She's the head of communication in our association, dear Beatrice. I invite you to share with us how we can keep in touch also after this webinar, and I will share the slides.
Yeah, thank you, Yoji. Thank you, everybody, for joining the discussion today. Exactly. So I will try to be quick, but I will just invite you to connect with us on social media. As you see here, you can find us almost everywhere. And you will find, of course, there all the updates about the association. And also on the next slide, Yoji, exactly. I invite you to subscribe to our monthly newsletter, in which we always share the latest updates from the association and from the cultural and choral sector in general. And last but not least, I invite you to help us to spread the Benefits of Singing campaign, which you can find on our website. I will post a link in a second. It's right now translated in more than 20 languages. So it's also adaptable to your own organization. And if you also actually want to help us to translate it in another language which is not available at the moment, please let us know. And I think it's all. For anything you might need, or if you want to keep in touch, you can just drop us a message by email or on Facebook. And thank you very much, Yoji. I give the word back to you.
Thank you, Beatrice. Thank you to all three presenters. Thank you, Sjoerd. Thank you, Côme and Martine, for taking your time to participate in this webinar and to advocate for fair pay in the field of collective singing. Thank you all that joined us today here in Zoom and also through Facebook stream. We would like to invite you to our next webinar. It will be in September or in October. We will keep you posted also on that. And for sure, you will receive our email after this webinar with requests to evaluate us. And also you will receive the materials that our presenters shared during the presentation. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. We are there for you. And from our side, that is all for today. I wish you a wonderful rest of the evening and goodbye. I hope to see you on the next webinar.